South Korea, the
Yeah.
land of K-pop, cutting edge tech,
Right.
and martial law.
Yeah,
It's kind of a jarring combination.
it's a very strange.
It's not something you think of together, like
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah, very jarring.
A democracy finding itself suddenly under military control
Right.
for the first time since 1980.
For the first time in decades, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to take a deep dive into this situation.
Okay.
Try to understand how South Korea got here.
Yeah, it really did come out of left field.
Right.
President Yoon's surprise late-night address on December 3rd
Oh, wow.
sent shockwaves through the country and, honestly,
Yeah.
the world.
So before we dissect the events, can you give us a quick breakdown of what martial law actually entails? Not exactly an everyday topic for us.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Most people don't.
Not at all in every day.
Yeah.
Essentially, martial law is a state of emergency
Okay.
where the military steps in to take control, superseding civilian authorities like the police and courts.
Got it.
Even the legislature can be suspended.
Wow.
This means,
So, like, no more.
yeah, normal legal processes
Congress, no more.
and civil liberties, like
Right.
freedom of speech and assembly,
Yeah.
can be significantly curtailed.
So the rule book is basically rewritten with the military holding the pen.
Basically, yeah.
Wow. What prompted President Yoon to take such a drastic step?
Well, in his address, Yoon pointed the finger squarely at the opposition Democratic Party.
Okay.
He accused them of undermining South Korea's democracy,
Wow.
going so far as to claim they're attempting to overthrow the government and establish a drug haven sympathetic to North Korea.
Wow. Those are some serious accusations.
Very serious accusations.
But are they substantiated? Like, where's the...
That's the crux of the debate.
Okay.
The opposition vehemently denies these claims,
Okay.
calling them a politically motivated smokescreen to silence any dissent and consolidate power.
So they're saying he's just trying to...
They're arguing that Yoon is using the specter of instability to justify a power grab.
Wow. So we have two very different narratives here.
Right.
This is where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
What kind of evidence is being presented to back up these claims?
Well, this is where things get a bit murky.
Okay.
The information coming out of South Korea is tightly controlled now,
Right.
with media censorship in full effect.
Oh, wow.
So while the government claims to have evidence
Okay.
of the opposition's subversive activities, they haven't publicly revealed anything concrete.
Nothing specific.
The opposition, on the other hand,
Okay.
argues that their actions have always been within the bounds of democratic dissent.
Okay.
They're demanding transparency and due process,
Yeah.
but under martial law, that's a tall order.
That's pretty tough to get. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're in a he said, she said situation,
Yeah, it can
but with incredibly high stakes.
Right.
To understand the gravity of this, can you walk us through the specific measures outlined in this martial law decree?
Let's start with the most sweeping measure,
Okay.
the suspension of all political activities.
Okay.
This includes shutting down the National Assembly,
Oh, wow.
local councils,
Okay.
political party operations,
Right.
and banning any form of public demonstrations.
So essentially, any form of organized political opposition is completely shut down.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it extends to the media as well.
Okay.
All publications and broadcasts are now under the strict control of the Martial Law Command,
Gotcha.
tasked with preventing the spread
Okay.
of what they deem false information.
What kind of false information are we talking about? Is there any clarity on that?
That's where things get even more concerning.
Okay.
There are no clear guidelines
Okay.
on what constitutes false information,
Oh, wow.
leaving it open to broad interpretation
Right.
and potential abuse.
Gotcha.
This effectively muzzles any independent reporting or dissenting voices.
Making it difficult to get a clear picture of the situation on the ground.
So freedom of the press is effectively gone.
Essentially, yes.
Wow.
It's a major red flag
Yeah.
for many observers, both within South Korea and internationally.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
What other measures are causing concern?
Well, the decree also bans strikes
Okay.
and any gatherings deemed a potential threat to social order.
So no public.
This has had a direct impact on the healthcare system
Okay.
because resident doctors who are on strike over working conditions and pay were given a 48-hour ultimatum
Wow.
to return to work or face penalties.
It seems like the government is aiming to shut down
Yeah.
any form of collective action, whether it's political opposition, labor movements, or even just public gatherings. Yes, and this brings us to perhaps the most worrying aspect of this decree.
Okay.
The provision allowing for arrests and detentions without warrants.
Oh, wow.
Anyone deemed to be violating the martial law provisions
So, like, if you're protesting...
can be detained and searched without any due process.
So, essentially, anyone who steps out of line is at risk.
That's the fear.
Oh, wow.
This provision essentially grants the military unchecked power to crack down on any form of dissent, real or perceived.
Wow.
It's a chilling thought, and it harkens back to some dark chapters in South Korea's history.
You mentioned history.
Right.
How does this current situation compare to South Korea's previous experience with martial law back in 1980?
There are definitely some unsettling parallels.
Okay.
In 1980, martial law was imposed by a military dictatorship to suppress pro-democracy movements, leading to widespread human rights abuses.
While the specifics might differ, the echoes of history are certainly ringing loud right now.
Yeah.
Are there any safeguards in place this time around to prevent a repeat of those abuses?
Well,
South Korea is a democracy now, after all.
right. That's the hope. But the reality is that South Korea's constitution, while enshrining democratic principles, also grants broad executive powers during a state of emergency, like martial law.
I see.
There are provisions for judicial review, a key element in any democracy that allows courts to examine the legality of government actions.
Oh, that's good.
However, in a state of emergency, these can be easily bypassed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So the system designed to provide checks and balances could potentially be sidelined.
That's the concern.
Wow.
It places a lot of trust in President Yoon
Okay.
to use these expanded powers responsibly,
Yeah.
and not everyone is convinced he will.
Okay.
Critics point to his rhetoric, his targeting of the opposition, as evidence that he might be more inclined towards consolidating power rather than upholding democratic norms.
It's a very precarious situation then.
Very much so.
How are the people of South Korea reacting to this sudden shift in their reality?
Yeah.
Are they passively accepting these restrictions, or is there pushback?
It's definitely not a passive acceptance.
Okay.
Despite the risks, people are finding creative ways to voice their dissent and resist these measures.
Oh, so.
There have been protests, some escalating into clashes with police outside the National Assembly.
So there is some
In addition to the street protests,
physical resistance?
people are turning to digital platforms to circumvent censorship.
Gotcha.
Social media is being used to share information, organize, and express opinions.
So kind of like working around it.
Think of it as a digital underground railroad for information and dissent.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What else?
There are reports of underground newspapers popping up,
Oh, wow.
artists using their work to make political statements, even flash mobs forming to spread awareness and defy the restrictions on gatherings.
Wow. So they're finding ways to creative.
Get around this. That's incredible.
Yeah.
It seems like a pressure cooker situation,
Very much so.
with citizens pushing back against these restrictions.
What about the international community? We've heard concerns expressed,
Right.
but are any concrete actions being taken?
The international response is a mixed bag.
Okay.
The United States, South Korea's key ally, is trying to walk a tightrope,
Okay.
urging restraint and a return to democratic norms
Okay.
while also respecting South Korea's sovereignty.
It sounds like they don't want to be seen as interfering in another country's internal affairs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's the risk of appearing to condone what's happening.
Right.
It's a delicate balancing act.
Sure.
And so far, the U.S. response has been limited to diplomatic pressure and statements of concern.
Okay.
No concrete action,
It's not just words.
like sanctions, have been taken yet.
Okay.
Mostly just words.
What about other countries in the region?
Yeah.
How are they reacting to this unfolding situation in South Korea?
It's certainly causing ripples across Northeast Asia.
Sure.
China, for example, is watching this very closely. It's likely with a mix of apprehension and opportunity.
Oh.
They're probably concerned about potential instability on their doorstep,
Yeah, that makes sense.
but also seeing this as a chance to assert their own influence in the region,
Interesting.
possibly stepping into any perceived power vacuum.
So a potential power play in the making.
It's definitely a factor to consider.
Wow.
And then there's Japan, which has a historically complex relationship with South Korea.
Right.
They're likely apprehensive about the implications for regional security
Okay.
and the potential for the situation to escalate.
So a lot of watchful eyes.
Right.
And a whole lot of uncertainty about where this is headed.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears and try to game this out.
Okay.
What are some of the potential scenarios that could play out from here?
Sure.
What are the best case and worst case outcomes we could be looking at?
In a best case scenario,
Okay.
President Yoon utilizes these expanded powers to swiftly address the immediate concerns he cited, restore a sense of order, and then lift martial law.
Okay.
Paving the way for a return to democratic processes.
Okay.
It would be a short-lived crisis, a kind of reset button.
A temporary detour on the road to democracy.
Right.
But what about the flip side? What's the worst case scenario?
The worst-case scenario is a chilling one.
Okay.
A descent into authoritarianism. President Yoon could consolidate power, crack down on dissent even further, effectively turning South Korea into a dictatorship.
Wow.
It would be a complete reversal of the democratic progress the country has made.
Yeah.
And the consequences for the people of South Korea and the region as a whole would be devastating.
It's a stark contrast, a reset or a reversal.
Right.
Is there a middle ground here, some in-between scenario that's perhaps more likely?
There's always a middle ground.
Okay.
And in this case, it could involve President Yoon using this period of martial law to make significant and possibly permanent changes to the political system. He could consolidate executive power, weaken checks and balances, but stop short of becoming a full-blown dictator.
I see.
It would create a hybrid regime, a democracy in name only, with a facade of democratic institutions, masking an increasingly authoritarian reality.
A sort of democracy late.
Right.
Which could be just as dangerous in the long run.
Yeah.
What are some key things we should be watching for in the coming days and weeks to gauge which direction things are heading in? What are the telltale signs?
I think the level and nature of resistance will be a key indicator. If the protests continue to grow, become more organized, and garner wider public support, it could put significant pressure on the government to back down.
To strengthen numbers.
On the other hand, if the government responds with increased force and further restrictions, it could signal a move towards authoritarianism.
So people power could make a difference. But the government's response to that power will be telling.
Right.
What else should we be paying attention to?
The actions of the international community will be crucial if countries like the U.S. or even regional players start imposing sanctions or taking other concrete measures. It could have a real impact on the South Korean government's calculations. Right now, they're facing mostly words of concern.
Just talk.
Actions speak louder.
Exactly. So international pressure could be a potential game changer.
Right.
Is there anything else we should be watching for?
I think keep an eye on the rhetoric coming from the government. They doubled down on their accusations using increasingly inflammatory language. It could indicate they're digging in and leaning towards authoritarian measures. Conversely, if they start emphasizing dialogue and a return to normalcy, it might signal a willingness to de-escalate the situation.
It's fascinating how something as seemingly simple as language can be such a powerful indicator of intent. It all paints a complex and concerning picture.
Definitely.
What's your gut feeling about where this is all going?
Honestly, it's really hard to say. It's too early to say for sure. There are so many factors at play. Internal political dynamics, regional tensions, international pressure. It truly feels like we're at a crossroads. You know, South Korea has made remarkable strides as a democracy. But as the situation shows, those gains are fragile.
It's a stark reminder that democracy isn't a destination. It's a journey.
Yeah, it's a process.
It requires constant vigilance and active participation.
Absolutely.
Not just from those in power, but from citizens as well.
And this applies not just to South Korea, but to democracies around the world. What's happening there serves as a cautionary tale.
I agree.
A reminder that democratic values can be threatened from within just as easily as from external forces.
Absolutely. So what can we, as informed citizens, do to protect and strengthen democratic values, both in our own countries and in supporting those facing challenges like South Korea?
Well, I think awareness is key. We need to stay informed about what's happening globally. Educate ourselves about the threats to democracy,
Uh-huh.
and engage in constructive dialogue.
Right.
Complacency is the enemy of democracy.
And what about holding our own leaders accountable?
Yeah.
How can we ensure that they uphold democratic principles and don't abuse their power?
That's crucial.
Yeah.
We need to demand transparency,
Well-
hold our elected officials to the highest ethical standards,
Uh-huh.
and be vigilant against any attempts to erode our rights
Right.
or undermine democratic institutions.
Gotcha.
We need to be active participants, not passive observers.
It sounds like you're saying we can't take democracy for granted.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
requires constant tending, nurturing,
Yeah.
and yes, sometimes defending.
It's hard,
It is. And I think it also requires empathy and understanding.
right?
The challenges facing South Korea aren't unique.
Right.
Many democracies around the world are grappling with similar issues.
Yeah.
Political polarization,
Mm-hmm.
economic inequality,
Right.
social unrest.
Yeah.
Addressing these root causes is essential
Yeah.
if we want to prevent further erosion of democratic values.
It's a complex and challenging task, but one that we all have a stake in.
I agree, and I think this deep dive into the situation in South Korea is a good starting point.
Yeah.
It's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the fragility of democracy
Absolutely.
and the importance of safeguarding our freedoms.
Well said.
Exactly.
So to our listeners out there,
Yeah.
we encourage you to continue your own deep dive into this issue.
Keep learning.
Research the history of martial law,
Yeah,
explore different perspectives on the situation in South Korea,
absolutely.
and consider what it all means for the future of democracy globally.
Right.
And most importantly,
Yeah.
stay engaged, stay informed, and stay vigilant.
Because the future of democracy might just depend on it.
That's all the time we have for today.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was great to be here.
Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.